Okay, let's give this a quick second here. This is a take two. Let me fire up my console here and see how things are looking on YouTube. I've rebooted. My desktop share stuff looks good. All right, I see the take two stream. See if people jump over. Looks like we're live. Awesome. Welcome. Okay, so welcome to Minding the Key Store. I'm Brian Roma, your shopkeeper. And this is the YouTube channel where we talk all things public key infrastructure, all things PKI. Today we're going to talk about running some commands to get your certificate distribution point installed. And it's a pretty simple command. There's a hey Matt, good to see you, man. And get some folks in the chat. Yeah, it was right in the middle of the countdown. I'm like setting stuff up and I'm getting my windows, making sure my windows are sized okay. So when I share it, it looks okay to all of you. And then all of a sudden the screen sharing window that shares part of my desktop just went blurp, went completely black. I was like, well, and it's all part of the same software that's doing the countdown and the music and everything else. So it was like, oh, dude. So I just did a full restart and then jump back in. For all the Linux heads are like, yes, I fix everything with a reboot. I know, I'm a Windows guy. You know, that tends to be the fix action all the time. So today we're going to talk about CDPs, right? So a little bit about what they are and a little bit about the install process. Got a couple of commands to share with you and some design preferences that we use here at PKI Solutions. So a CDP is it's an acronym within an acronym. It's a certificate revocation list distribution point. The certificate revocation list is a list of certificates that have been revoked. And keeps track of those within a given environment. Now, depending on how you have your Active Directory certificate services or other PKI environments set up, it determines how often your CRLs may be checked with. And there's a series of other actions, like when a certificate is installed and so on, it checks to see if it's a valid certificate. So if you set your CRLs to be 100-year CRLs, then you install a certificate, the client in question will check the CRL certificate revocation list wherever it's hosted, that's specified, that's stamped into the certificate, and say, hey, am I valid? And then once it's installed and started, that's it for the next 100 years. Based on, there's overlap, there's some other strategies and stuff like that. So typically what we recommend at PKI Solutions is that you set, if you look online, there's a bunch of shake and bake guides that have you set up your CRL distribution point right on the certificate authority. We don't recommend that at PKI Solutions. We recommend a separate dedicated server for a number of reasons. One, everybody needs to get to that CDP, and you want anonymous traffic to be able to get to it. So Cisco devices and folks handheld devices, their phones, or there maybe a workplace tablet or something like that, IoT devices that are manufacturing things, they want to be able to get to this anonymous resource, this resource that's open to everybody to see if their certificate has been revoked, is still valid. And so that's one reason. And going through the process, you're going to install web server services via IIS on your Windows server. And typically we don't recommend setting something like that up on something as critical as a certification authority. CA is there for issuing and revoking certificates. It's there for issuing the CRL. And that's really, it's about there's template issuance that's in there as well. So if you've got a particular CA that you want to be the hub for that issuance process for a particular template, that's what a CA is there for. So certificate revocation list is something that we recommend putting on a separate server where you can install IIS and then set up a share that's available to everybody in the outside world. Super long intro. All right, so as always, I'm going to minimize the chat window if you've got something specific you want to talk about, question, comment, thought, concern, although we hear that in corporate spaces so much. I don't want to use corporate speak so much, so apologies, but I'm going to jump over and share just a little bit. And I am going to, give me just 1 second. I'm going to remove a role. So if you are using Autolab and you have a role installed, that's part of that Autolab config. Desired state configuration is part of that rollout, that Autolab build out. So if you have, like I built out an Autolab definition that made a CDP that had IIS, which is awesome. The problem is if I want to uninstall it to do a demo and I let it set, DSC kicks in and says, this is supposed to have IIS, and it reboots the box and puts it back on the system. So I'm going to pull IIS off of this server again. I've been through this a few times. And then I'm going to, here, I'll cut over to that system. Let me go to the desktop share. That's a little bit better. It's going away. And let's get some PowerShell going on here. So the Cdp install is a super basic. We're going to install IIS. We're going to put a virtual directory on there and point to a specific folder. And then we're going to set up permissions so that the cert publishers, which your certification authorities or certificate authorities should be a member of, can write to that particular directory. Now, on this particular server, I have it configured to a D drive. Letters don't really matter, but we also recommend a separate volume for things like your certificate authority logs and or certificates for your root CA and or root CRIL, and then the certificate revocation list for your certification authorities. So right now we've got a D drive, nothing in it. The names of the drives, the names of the folders aren't nearly as important as remembering. So if you're going to call your folder PKI, make sure to call it that in the script. And also, here, is this done? It's still going. And also thinking about what you're going to put in front of this. Now, this has a web component to it. So something that's worth noting and something you should consider before you get everything built out, and definitely before you get certificate services rolling and getting certs out the door, is certification authorities are things that are in place for 5 years, 10 years, 50 years possibly, if you've got like an IoT manufacturing type environment. It could be a really long time that a CA environment is in place. So what you should consider is the name, the way that clients are going to be able to determine where the certificate revocation list sits. Highly, highly recommend against putting a value in your build out that says, in this particular case, this is CDP 01. I would not put CDP 01 at company.pri. I wouldn't do that. I would come up with a namespace. CRL.company.pri. Some people do PKI and do PKI.company. Or whatever your domain name is, contoso.com, whatever your domain is. And then think about how resilient you want that namespace to be and how many servers maybe you want hosting that. Some people put a single server out there, they put their CRIL out there, and they're good to go. One of the last environments I worked in, we had a multi data center, multi-regional entity and enterprise, and so we had certificate revocation lists in multiple locations, and then and we had load balancers that were taking care of queries for a given region. And then there were load balancing groups that were in place for, the globe. And all of that resolved up to a particular DNS name that the load balancer sat in front of. If you're part of a smaller organization, maybe that isn't something that's available to you. Maybe you have to take a step back with something that's less robust and maybe less enterprise, but it's a little more resilient in something like a DNS round robin. There are some issues with DNS round robining. It's not actual load balancing. Doesn't make sure that servers or services are up and working, but it does give you the ability to put multiple records behind it. So you could put like a second CDP in place and maybe host that in a different rack or data center, whatever level of resilience you got. All right, I'm going to stop yakking here because I'm going to run out of, not the ISE. What are you doing? Okay, so first thing we're going to do is we are going to install the service and put the management tools with it. Come on. Okay, so we're going to install the web server service. This is the same command, PowerShell command that you would use, whether it was for any kind of website. Nothing special. Running with an elevated command prompt. Now, there are some guides out there that will walk you through doing this, and they'll have you install the online responder at the same time. Be aware, install the online responder and or configure your environment to use Delta crills intentionally. The online responder is not a replacement to the CDP. It's an augmentation to it. And there's some specific, every certificate that gets revoked and in your environment gets added to that CRL, and so it can grow. But there are certain thresholds. Your CRL has to get pretty big in order to justify, going to an online responder. And then there are certain technologies that have problems with CRLs, and so you need to think about that as well. But you should know as part of your planning process. It shouldn't just be, well, I'm going to install it because people say to. But just as a heads up. Okay, so there's that. We also have, let me see if I can space this out. Come on. Trying to space this out so we can see it. I've got some, we're going to create a directory on the D drive, and then create a share. And we're basically setting this up so that administrators have, full permissions on the folder, but also that the cert publishers group. So when you do we haven't talked about Active Directory preparation, but when you set up your environment, if you as a PKI pro don't have enterprise admin rights, you're going to need to work closely with your AD team. And then they're going to have to, there's some delegation pieces to do in Active Directory. And one of the pieces you're going to ask for help with is to get the servers that you're going to build out as CAs added to the CA publishers group. You don't have to add the CDPs to it, but you do need to add the cert publishers group. So because this is a built-in group and our CA share should already be in there as part of the build-out process or that prep process, we're going to set the ACL to go to that. And then there's some additional permission pieces that we're going to do. And we're also going to create a couple of placeholder HTML files for putting the index for the page, but also the CPS. We had a really good PKI tribe, which is part of our annual subscription membership. It's our community. We had a great call with Mark Cooper at PKI Solutions, who talked through the CP and CPS and why they're important, what they can inform, how long it takes to put one together, who should be involved in the process. It's a really, really cool call. It's a dry process to go through it, but, Mark is really good at, oops, I'm not going to do that again. Mark is really good at articulating things that might be seen as dry or boring. There we go. And letting us know how important that is. So that has run. There's our PKI folder. There's our CPS and index.html. Okay. No errors, no problems. That's it. And I'll put these, I know there were some requests, some people following up on last week with some of the commands, being more granular with posting the commands. I'm certainly going to double check, follow up on some of the moderation stuff that's out there. So if you're watching this today and you haven't seen those updates, that is coming. But there's a couple things that we need to follow up on. Make sure IIS pops here. There's IIS. Tools. You're gonna make me reboot. I just did this as a demo. Oh, for crying out loud. Okay. Let's restart this real quick. All right, I'm gonna cut back to me real quick. Let's take a look at the chat here and see what the peeps are up to. So, looks like people are taking notes here. That's awesome. So don't forget when you build out your server account, you're thinking about where I'm going to put Active Directory certificate services. You need to think about, secure locations that you can put your certification authority. You need to think about guarding the keys for the issuing certificate authorities. So that's going to inform whether you have hardware security modules that guard the private keys. And where those reside, sometimes they need to be in the same rack or in a specific data center, or a specific data center that have a series of protocols that are very specific about protecting those servers. So that's a strategy you need to think through as you get things rolled out. Now, another piece of this is where are you going to put your CDPs, your curl distribution points? Are you going to put them in the exact same space as the certificate authority? In some cases, some environments treat their CAs very, very they put them in very, very secure VLANs, and so it can become problematic because you need to have port 80. You're not going to secure this with an SSL certificate or anything else, as Jake from PKI Solutions likes to say. Putting a cert, an SSL cert on your CDP is like taking the keys to your safe and putting them in the safe and locking it, because if there's a problem with your PKI, you can't get to the CRL. So you want it left open on port 80. And so some environments have some problems. They have some strict standards around what can get into and out from the VLAN where those certification authorities lie, and there could be issues in your corporate environment about taking another server in that same VLAN and saying, I want the entire world, or I want all the corporate IP ranges to get to this particular server via port 80. So just something to think about. Maybe that's another VLAN. You put those web servers, the CDPs on those particular servers, and then go through some firewall rules to make sure that the two servers can talk to each other. There's some cheat sheets that we put together at PKI Solutions that will help with that. Okay, my server's back up. Let me log in here. I have heard in my travels, I've heard people ask, well, if you're going to load balance, couldn't you just cluster? Couldn't you just cluster these? Clustering, it's a very complex, not the PKI is complicated, it can be. It really complicates the PKI architecture, and then it takes you back to a single point of failure, which is the shared volume, or the shared storage between the two cluster nodes if you're doing like a traditional active-passive. So typically what we recommend is that you set up multiple curl distribution points, and then in your build out of your certification authorities, you add in the configuration to target multiple CDPs, and it just kind of churns its way through the list. And you can get strategic about it, where if you're in a given region, maybe you target the regional CDPs first and the rest of the global CDPs next, or you just go in the same order every single time. I mean, there's a handful of different ways that you can look at it. Let me get this resized. Okay. Tools. Hey, IIS Manager. Great. Okay, let me share again. this resized so you can see what the deal is. So what do you have on your list to work on this year? Are you building out a PKI? You building something from scratch? Have you ever done it before? Okay. I'd love to hear in the comments. Where's the default? Where'd the default site go? Well, that's not. Dang it, Beavis. Why didn't the default site? Okay. Gotta roll back to a snapshot, I guess. Not sure what's going on with this. Can I... Let me create a folder real quick and just add a dummy. And in order to, and yes, I'm putting this on the C drive right now. So one of the things that I did is I used Autolab, and I did a refresh-lab. I had done a snapshot-lab when I got everything patched up to the latest and greatest, and then I did a refresh lab to go back to the last known good configuration that didn't have CA services installed. I tested some different scripting ideas, and so worst case, although it complicates things. Let's see if I can get this going the rest of the way. Let me jump back to the chat real quick. So one of the things that I can do is I can roll it back to a snapshot, but we're 20 minutes into the stream. I was really hoping. Let me try removing this one more time. Did it not install everything? You're watching me click. What are you doing? Brian, what are you doing? All right, let's try this one more time. I'm going to uninstall, reboot, and give it one more go. Manage. So it's a good idea if you've gone through the Autolab build out. It would be really, and this was something that I was talking through with some of the guys who are playing, some of our students who are playing with us a little bit. That, you know, it's not a bad idea to get a template that you're happy with. Like we've got a 2019 build out that we're pretty happy with the build so far, or there's some more AD stuff we'd like to add to it, but deploy it and then maybe create your additional service accounts if there's something that's missing from the template. Make sure everything is patched. If you download Autolab from the MIT/Plural site GitHub, there's a 100 and something page admin guide that's in there, and so you can do things like I think it's update-lab patches everything. Snapshot-lab will get you checkpoints set up in Hyper-V. Remember, you need to have all of your servers turned off in order to get that checkpoint. I'm going to restart this VM one more time. And then, so patch it, configure it, update it, snapshot it, and then start doing your build outs. Because my goal with this series is to put together enough simplicity in getting a server infrastructure built out, and then how to quickly get Active Directory certificate services installed as fast as you possibly can, so that you can get to something like, well, I want to test building a CDP rollout, or I'd like to build Endus. But I don't have 3 days to get the prerequisites installed. So I guess I'll guess on how this works. Like, I've been there, and that's no fun. Okay, my system rebooted. Let's see what we're doing. It's refreshing. I may trim this. There's IIS. Okay, let's try again. Get the management tool going, and if it opens with the default website, like it should, when a fresh IIS install happens the way it's supposed to. If not, I'll cover the other 2 steps. We'll talk about it verbally. And then I will let you go. I'm waiting for the console to refresh. Let me jump to the chat real quick, see what people are thinking. Matt says, agonizing over all of the things I could have done more simply if I had these videos and guidance first. Well, that's why we're here, and I'm glad that you're here for the journey. And the best part of this is, because so before I learned about this process, one of my larger PKI rollouts for a larger organization, quite a few years ago now, but they're like, can you build certificate authorities? And I was like, I can build certificate authorities. And Microsoft had a bunch of documents out there that were like, how to do the thing. And it was they had a guide how to do a 2-tier PKI with Server 2008. And it was their shake and bake format, which doesn't consider HSMs. It doesn't talk about load balancing. It doesn't acknowledge anything exists outside of Microsoft's ecosystem. It just, it's essentially, if you wanted to do kind of what we're talking about here, and you wanted to click through it by hand on Server 2008, follow this document. So I grabbed the guide, tested it out, and was like, well, it issues certificates. Head nod, I guess we're good to go. And that was what we went with. There wasn't more vetting about what are our use cases for certificates, who needs to use them and when, how long should these CAs be around for, where should they be stored, what kind of protocols should be involved, and people who can access them, who has rights on these. Like, everybody and their brother had admin rights, to lots of servers, to not the least of which was a certification authority. Many organizations view a CA and the CA infrastructure as a glorified file server. It basically gives you a ticket, aka a certificate that sits on somebody's system, and that's it. And one of my favorite analogies when I'm talking with people about certificate services is, it's great to consider Active Directory certificate services kind of like the Department of Motor Vehicles here in the United States. A certificate isn't just a file, it's like your driver's license. You had to go through a process to get your identity validated. And so if the DMV just kind of opened things up, or somebody could walk in and like photocopy something and, hey, look, I'm a driver in my particular state in the United States, it would lower the credibility of the DMV, and therefore your driver's license would probably have less power as an identification source. Same thing with your CAs, and same thing with how you store your certificates. If you go through the process, and everybody and their brother can get into the CAs, and they can get to the private keys for the CAs, and you're signing, cross-signing, and you're doing wildcard certs so that one server looks like it's another server across the board. Then the identity verification process that's intrinsic to public key infrastructure and ADCS gets watered down a lot. So yeah, it's a really long story to say, I'm right there with you. I do not see. It's not coming back up. Okay, so the two things that are left, maybe I'll do a part 2 of this. Can I get this? How long we've been going on the stream? Because we've been going for a hot minute. Oh, we're at 30 minutes. Alrighty. I'm going to double check that the admin tools are installed. And like anything with live television, this was tested multiple times. The RSAT tools, role administration tools. Looks like it's there. All right. Come on, come on, come on. So what we're going to do is we're going to set up a virtual directory and point to that folder that's on the D drive. We don't have to let this sit for dead air. Okay. Yay. Okay. Sites. Default website. Huzzah. I don't know what the deal was. Should have been there. Okay. It's not Monday, it's Diet Monday, or is it the sequel? Monday Part 2. All right, let's go back here. All right, so we have the default website, and there's a couple of things that we need to configure on here. So let me go back to this real quick. Now, your chosen standard for file sharing and permissions may vary. Out of the box, the syntax that I've got, this is an open share. This is not an admin share, so this is not PKI dollar. Many environments would want to do this as an administrative share. I left it open so that if you're running with it, you want to test. Sometimes it trips people up when they're new. You might want to, take a closer look at that. If we look at the advanced sharing, just to go back to, so there's our cert publishers. Everyone has read. You want everyone to be able to get to the krill, okay? You want your CAs to be able to write to it because they got to be able to put it there. And then you've got users, which the IIS users have permissions, but again, cert publishers have modify, super important. Okay, so call PKI, not PKI dollar. So we're going to create a virtual directory. I'm just going to call it PKI. Again, you could call it CDP. You could call it lots of stuff. Okay, we're going to point it at the folder where we set up those permissions. Okay. Now, it is important. You can do this on the default website if you choose to, or you can do it on the folder on its own, but we highly recommend that you, oh, hey, let me drag this over because this thing rebooted a couple of times. Let me do this so you get the whole screen. Please hold. All right, there we go. So you want to set up directory browsing. Set up. Let's double check it at the parent site. So it's enabled. Directory browsing has been set up. And then the other thing that we recommend it's a belt and suspenders approach. Is that you enable double escaping. So if you go to, and this gives you the ability to, this will let IIS work the way it's supposed to with delta crills. Now, it's very special use cases for why you might need a delta CRL, but when we do a standard implementation, we always set up double escaping. It just makes it easier to do that, right? So I recommend just out of the box, set it up. You don't necessarily need delta curls, but it's one less production change you're going to have to do, and it's just a checkbox. So I'm going to go to the PKI folder. I'm going to scroll down here to request filtering. Going to edit feature settings and make sure allow double escaping is checked. Okay. You're going to need to restart the site when you make changes to IIS. And then from there, you would be configuring, and I'm not going to get into the HTML updating, but you should be configuring and customizing your index.html. Some people call this the policy.html. In here, you would say, you would have examples of what the CA environment's used for, processes for requesting certificates, and so on. That was far more painful for a simple install. Holy cow. Crazy. Let's see where we are. All right, so that was a 35-minute demo. There was at least 10 minutes of either me troubleshooting my streaming system or the VM having a problem with uninstalling and reinstalling IIS with apparently DSC being a problem. So maybe in my next AutoLab build out, I'll just do one of my workloads won't have IIS in there, and that way I'm not fighting the AutoLab infrastructure trying to push it back down while I'm doing a demo. So food for thought, things that we learn. Thank everyone for being here and participating. I'd love to hear from those of you. Let me know in the chat, what are you working on in the upcoming year? What is it that you're, and I'm asking, one, because I love to hear from people, but also it's going to help inform the kind of content that we're bringing. So our theme for February that's coming up, we're going to talk about standard maintenance practices. What kinds of things should you be doing? Should you be checking and maintaining weekly, monthly, once a year for your ADCS environment? Things you should keep an eye on. Things maybe you could delegate to an admin team or something like that. Because typically, at least in my travels, this is the time of year when people are getting their bearings and they're delivering metrics. Maybe they're doing maintenance things because the year is just getting started and infrastructure project dollars haven't been released yet, that kind of stuff. So we're going to get into that in February. But if you have other topics or thoughts, we'd love to hear about it. And I will catch you next week when we talk about the CA web enroll role and using PowerShell commands to install that. Those of you that want more syntax in the previous releases, we're going to put them there. Take care. Be safe. Love interacting with all of you. And we'll talk very soon. All right, everybody.